You are listening to the Foreign Policy Focus podcast.
We cannot wait for the final proof. The smoking gun could come in the form of a mushroom cloud.
Haven't you driven enough people from their homes already? Bulldoze their villages, seize their property under laws they had no part in making.
Now working in Libya with friends and allies, we've demonstrated what collective action can achieve in the 21st century.
Now the host of the show, Kyle Ansel.
This is episode 537 of the Foreign Policy Focus podcast. This will be a notable episode of Foreign Policy Focus as it's the last solo show I'm doing, as Sunday, August 31st, me and Will Porter are launching the new show, Conflicts of Interest, which will replace Foreign Policy Focus. So I really appreciate if everybody could go to the Libertarian Institute. I'm the news editor there, and also check out the daily news roundup, but go to the show notes page for this show, and in there I have links to the new YouTube page, Facebook page, and Twitter account, and then you can subscribe and get the show when it starts to drop, starting this Sunday. So that's really exciting, but I do want to go ahead and do a regular episode of Foreign Policy Focus and cover what's in the news. And so I will start here by talking about the shooting of this man, James Blake, in Kenosha, Wisconsin. This is, somewhat significant to me personally, as I attended Carthage College, which is in Kenosha. And so some buddies of mine lived not 3 blocks from where Blake was shot by the police. And then a lot of the places that have been burned down in the subsequent rioting are places, that I'm familiar with. I don't know if any of the, places I like to eat or stores I like to go to are actually burned down, but definitely recognize a lot of the buildings that have been destroyed. And so, it's been interesting seeing all that from both sides. I mean, first of all, the shooting is absolutely, the video there is pretty wrenching to watch. The police officer shoots Blake in the back 7 times, which is, the real problem with this. Now, more evidence and information could come out to change the way we kind of feel about the shooting altogether, or maybe the police officers need to actually stop. There's a report this guy was having sex with underage girls, or potentially had a knife and was threatening somebody, which in some cases, can change how you feel about, police using a certain level of violent force to stop somebody. But, turning a guy into Swiss cheese was certainly completely unnecessary. And the fact that, police and nobody looks and thinks that a serious and honest investigation will be carried out, justice will be done, is a huge problem. But turning this into just burning down a community that certainly doesn't need it is, really a terrible thing to do. I really loved living in Kenosha. It was probably the second favorite place I've ever lived. And, so seeing it burned down does, provoke a little bit of an emotional feeling for me. And so I guess I don't want to completely dismiss that some of my feelings that the rioting was way over the top this time and is worse than what we see, maybe because of that. But it does seem like for what happened, which, the guy will pull through, although paralyzed, and that, he possibly wasn't completely unarmed and had a warrant out for his arrest for assaulting underage women, are certainly complicating factors to the whole thing and change the way people. So from that to the reaction that we got burning down the town seems really crazy. And I've even seen some other people post that compared to even Minneapolis and Portland, the destruction to private property has been excessive. And so I was looking at a video this morning of what I never called when I was going to college there, but what people call the uptown area of Kenosha. It's not necessarily the area I hung out in a lot, but every single business is destroyed. And then there's also a video of a guy defending his store by spraying people with a fire extinguisher, right? So this isn't he wasn't swinging it at anybody. He was basically just trying to scare people away from his business. And somebody came up behind him, and I'm not sure what they hit him in the back of the head with, but, this guy is likely to suffer just as much as the guy that the, cop did something to. And to be honest, they're probably just about as much as a chance with the state we're in right now of that person getting caught and facing justice as the cop. And so, that's the real problem with all this, is that the rioting is actually creating more injustice and not in any way, taking everybody to a place where we want to be, where everybody gets justice for when, we're wronged. And so me and Will are going to cover that definitely more on Friday's show. That Will has been already doing some great reporting on this, and I'll link to this thread he put together in the show notes page, but he's basically just trying to capture some of the videos of what's going on there. And it's really crazy to watch, this, where there's fairly decent explosions from fireworks going off and hitting, armored looking vehicles on streets that, I walk down a lot of times half sober, and it's just crazy to see the town in that state. So more on that in the coming weeks. But to get into some other news, and I do just want to note real quick that I am doing this as well as a trial of conflicts of interest, like recording a solo show. So I have a little bit more going on than, just the typical record and go button today. So if I see a little bit more disorganized, I apologize. Or if there's some gaps in the audio, I am just kind of trying to manage a little bit more than I'm used to. But I think altogether it'll be a quality product still. So some other news to talk about. Facebook banned over 900 pages tied to the QAnon theory, and then restricted 10,000 Instagram accounts and 2,000 Facebook groups for supporting Q. Now, one thing I found interesting is just at the same time I heard from other people around Facebook saying that some of their groups had gotten shut down or restricted that were more right-wing pro-2A groups than necessarily QAnon groups, although I'm sure there was overlap between those two communities. And so, I think that's part of the danger of this, is where you're going to have Facebook saying, oh, we're banning QAnon, but really they're banning anything where anyone is remotely related to QAnon, which is anything on the right. And, you get all that taken off of the community, not just the, Q people who in a lot of ways have some awfully kooky beliefs. Now, that being said, the Russiagators on the other side are twice as crazy as the Q people, and they get, CNN to speak. So there's no reason for Facebook to censor these people off of their, small platforms that they have on the social network. Last week on the show, I had discussed this interview that Donald Trump was doing, where he just kind of off the cuff mentioned that some people see Edward Snowden as a traitor, some people see him as something else. I don't think he actually used the words hero or anything like that. But, Donald Trump kind of says, hey, some people say to pardon the guy. And there's a reason, I guess, that we get excited for this at this time. And so there is a write-up here, I believe, by Jason Ditz, news.antiwar.com. And he explains that Trump's Attorney General, Bob Barr, says absolutely not going to do this. And it's just another case where Trump has a message that's, very popular to the people of this country, because it's an example of, us getting information that the elites didn't want us to have. Snowden leaked information that showed the government was spying on us, that James Clapper, who was, since lied about Russiagate, but the big lie he told at the time was about, hey, we're not spying on American citizens. And so, it would be very popular, I think, to pardon Snowden, and yet Trump won't do it because his the people he has surrounded himself with and put in important, powerful positions, like Bob Barr, like Mike Pompeo, like John Bolton, and so many others, Mark Esper, Patrick Shanahan, James Mattis. All these people are very dangerous and dedicated to the foreign policy consensus, and they make sure that the things we really want, the less imperial foreign policy and way of operating, doesn't happen. And so another example of this is another article I have here from the news page at antiwar.com. This one by Dave DeCamp, that basically says, both parties are promising to you in the election. Now the DNC through their platform, and Trump, I guess, released this 50-point thing that he plans to do in his second term if he's reelected. And both of them are like, hey, we're going to end the endless wars. But in reality, both of these camps really don't have any interest in doing it. And we get promised over and over and over again, and the endless wars and the endless wars, and then it doesn't happen. And so I'm guessing the 2020 election here will likely lead us to all feeling the same way, that whether Donald Trump's elected to a second term or Biden is elected to Obama's third term, it doesn't really matter. We're going to continue with the same interventionist foreign policy. I've seen more of this, especially through both conventions, basically, doubling down on the establishment foreign policy. We had to be committed to our allies. Russia's a threat. China's a threat. We have to remain committed in the Middle East to prevent any terrorists from ever doing anything ever, even though it's actually our presence in the Middle East that leads to so much of the blowback terrorism. The Air Force released a list of potential upgrades to the ICBM program, intercontinental ballistic missiles. These are missiles with nuclear warheads on them in silos. They're actually, I guess they can be used as nuclear weapons, but a lot of their strategic purpose is just to be used as what they call the nuclear sponge. So if, the U.S. does go to nuclear war with Russia, Russia has to target all of our nuclear silos. And so they're spread all out, around the Midwest and Great Plains and I guess mountains region of this country, all these nuclear silos. So Russia will have to, drop 2 or 3 bombs on each of them to make sure they take out all of America's nukes. And so, it's just disgusting because, tens of millions of Americans, live under this region that, according to defense planning, is acceptable losses, to defend our city should nuclear war come. But, this particular news story, the reason I actually brought it up was that the list of potential upgrades includes hypersonic missiles. And recent reporting by Andrew Coburn, at Harper's, did absolutely fantastic job explaining that, look, the technology isn't there, and so at this point it's just throwing money away, and it's an unnecessary arms race, and that the weapons can't do what they claim the outcomes to be, which is the case in most of the recent U.S. weapons programs. If you look at what's happened with recent bomber projects, the F-35, the USS Reagan class of aircraft carriers, the lift's not working, the Zumwalt class of destroyers, the main gun's not working. There's so many problems with these massive military projects that I'm sure this will just be a huge subsidy to companies like Lockheed Martin or whoever gets the contracts to build these weapons that at the very best we never use them, because if we get to use them, it's in a nuclear war with Russia and then we're all dead and it doesn't help. Steve Bannon got arrested. And so the left is definitely in this, especially, the Democrat hardcore, taking a victory lap on this. It was, I guess, for lying to donors about the Build the Wall fundraiser. It was never actually meant to build a wall. It just sounded like that. And so that's fraud, and he was arrested. I'm interested if anybody who actually donated to that GoFundMe felt defrauded, and if Steve Bannon offered to give those people their money back. How many people of those who donated to the Build the Wall campaign are just happy with what Steve Bannon it was doing with their money anyways? Even people say, oh, he was sitting on a yacht that he bought with the money. What a huckster. Some people really just don't care. And so I hope these fraud charges are in some way legitimate, although getting Steve Bannon away from his microphone where all he's doing is fear-mongering against China, as me and Dave DeCamp have talked about, it was certainly a big deal. The U.S. will use funds frozen by sanctions on Venezuela to fund the regime change efforts against Maduro. So the U.S. sanctions Venezuela. There's certain funds tied up, I think, in Citgo and other things. Probably some Venezuelan oil that was in U.S. Zones where we are able to seize it. And now we're giving it to the Venezuelan opposition. It's, in a very dark way, a comedy of how U.S. foreign policy works, right? Where the regime change, are the efforts there are so dark, where, we're taking now money was at least in part going to trickle down to the Venezuelan people and giving it to the opposition, where they're just going to use it to foment more chaos and instability in that country. And the U.S. is backing a leader who's just not popular. Juan Guaido, the guy we've been backing for president for like a year and a half now, has had his runs at it. He's had his coup attempts, 2 or 3 of them now, and no time can he gather enough popular support and can't even coalesce the opposition to Maduro around him. They can't even all agree that this guy's better than Maduro. He's so bad. And yeah, we continue to waste our money on him, even though some it has been shown to go to corrupt places. I got one more story here on disturbing U.S. trends with our military here. And this is by Michael T. Clare, and this is at Tom's Dispatch, the great Tom Englehart's website. And this is all about the U.S. moving towards AI and different kinds of artificial intelligence in the military. And so, he points out that the argument is being made that the way current battlefields work, identifying friend and foe and determining what's happening on the battlefield all develops absolutely too fast for the way military planning works now to keep up with it. And so the solution is to move to more AI-based technologies. Now, the problem with this is, as he points out, and several different ways in the article, but the best point I think he makes is essentially the AI's lack of understanding of humanity and like what's a show of force versus strategic planning to carry out a nuclear first strike. The best example of this, and Scott Horn talks about it a lot, is the Able Archer military games, where the U.S. had built up these military games so big that the Soviets were really concerned it was just a front, for a first strike. And so if the Soviets, made that calculation, I think, AI definitely could, and it could be very problematic, just not understanding what's saber rattling and stuff like that. Also, how well is this going to be able to differentiate civilians from insurgents and stuff like that? It's a very dangerous direction to move. Not that I want warfare to be centered around humans, because at the end of the day that leads to dead bodies and it's terrible. But the solution is to move as much as we can away from war, not upgrade our warfare systems and automate them, especially in any case our nuclear weapons, which they're also looking at. All right, some other news I want to talk about. 15 people were killed by 2 bombings in the Philippines. This is in a southern city with a larger Muslim populations and sympathies with radical Sunni groups. And I guess this was timed around, I think, the 2 or 3 year anniversary of the small Islamic State takeover of a city in the Philippines for a month or so, caused real problems and occupied there. And so 15 people dead, including the suicide bomber, but there were 2 different bombings. Another tragic anniversary, and that is of the ethnic cleansing of the Rohingya people from Myanmar. These are a group of Muslims that are a minority in that country. They were pushed out in cases of, ethnic cleansing, where they were killing people or forcing them to flee, burning down their houses, bulldozing their villages. I've seen estimates of up to 1 million Rohingya have fled the country and now live mostly in refugee camps in Bangladesh, and from what I read, horrid conditions. A couple times a year you read stories of somebody being trampled to death by an elephant in one of these places. I think there's a lot of gangsterism and stuff like that there. The conditions are pretty poor. I know that the camps are hit by typhoon or something pretty recently that hit that region. So there's a lot of suffering going on. I guess these people are holding the Rohingya are holding a silent protest to commemorate that 3rd anniversary. And then there's also the issue that there are some Rohingya still in Myanmar, and I believe there's still oppression against them, and this is exemplified by they're trying to get on the ballot, and the president there, who is a Nobel Prize laureate and was hailed by the Obama administration, Aung San Suu Kyi, is preventing that from happening. And so just another example of all the despots that we support show that they're truly despots and not the reformists we portray them as. In Afghanistan, the Taliban killed 3 people in a truck bomb attack. It targeted the Afghan army. 2 soldiers died. 1 civilian was also killed. 40 people were injured. Most of the injured were civilians. is a reminder that the Taliban do terrible attacks, but the solution isn't for the U.S. to stay in Afghanistan, but rather to leave, let the Afghans work this out for themselves. And so there could be some kind of stability. We're headed up now, I think, on the 19th anniversary of 9/11 within the next couple weeks here. There's also some issues in Afghanistan, sharing the border with Pakistan. Durand Line is this one right here that was drawn by the British and is not very accurate on where things are. The way they drew the line, villages were cut in half and is very problematic. But there's still skirmishes over it, and the Afghan army has recently signaled they're willing to fire on the Pakistanis if they advance on the border again. Since the threat was issued about a week ago now, I haven't read reports of Pakistan trying to, cross the border, I guess, cross what the Afghans interpret as the border or wherever they've drawn the red line at. Trump has said that he would retaliate if other countries are proven to have paid the Taliban bounties to kill U.S. soldiers, although that hasn't been proven. I guess I agree with him on the last part, although I think the first part's a pretty stupid red line for him to draw. The U.S. does a lot of nefarious things around the world, and so I definitely, especially for like the Iranians or something, I don't think it would be absurd if they were waging some kind of asymmetrical warfare where they in any way were incentivizing the Taliban to kill American soldiers. One thing to know is that not very American soldiers die in Afghanistan, and the number of Americans that have been killed are, labels that the forever war advocates say are acceptable losses. And they kind of acknowledge that those are the number of Americans that the Taliban will kill every year in our occupation. And so it doesn't seem like there's really anything to suggest a whole lot more Americans are dying than would be. The solution is just to bring American troops home, and that way they won't die over there. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says that the U.S. will maintain Israel's arms advantage over any Arab states in any future arms sales to the UAE or other countries. Part of what looks like the deal for the UAE to normalize their relations with Israel was for the U.S. to then open up F-35 sales to the UAE. Although Israel so far is objecting to this, it does seem like the two states are moving ahead with increasing their security ties, as the UAE has a call with the Israeli defense minister about it this week. Turkey is in talks with Russia to buy more S-400 air defense systems. This has been something I've really talked about throughout the forum, all 500 episodes of the Foreign Policy Focus podcast. Is here Turkey's purchase of the S-400 missile system because the U.S. has kicked Turkey out of the F-35 production line for buying it. They're saying that Turkey cannot buy any F-35s, and have said it's going to cause them to be kicked out of the NATO common air defense network. So Turkey has bought some F-35s, and after they are not F-35s, S-400s, and after they bought them, the U.S. has made all kinds of threats. We're going to sanction you. You're not going to be able to make the F-35 parts anymore. The only thing they've really fallen through on, I guess, is not selling the Turkey any F-35s. But Turkey continues to make parts for the F-35, remains in NATO, and hasn't faced sanctions from the U.S. The U.S. kept moving the ball, saying, oh, well, now just don't turn them on. You return them. And if, they're now planning on buying more, it doesn't seem like there's any plan to return them. My guess is that the Trump administration would not get into a bigger diplomatic contest with Turkey right now, and won't push the issue on sanctions, at least still not after the election, but we will see what happens. 2 civilians were killed by an airstrike in Yemen. Just a reminder that the ongoing Saudi air campaign continues there. Children are dying all the time, starving to death. It is absolutely horrific in Yemen, but I don't really have any other specifics on what's going on there. It just seems like more of the status quo. The Islamic State bombed Syria's main pipeline, causing power outages in and around the capital Damascus for several hours. I guess the pipeline has been restored, but there's an awful lot of oil and energy leaking out right now in Syria, and I'm wondering how much of a problem that's going to be in years to come. A lot of that oil actually is being pumped out of the ground by, the U.S. bad forces, the Kurds, or whatever American company they're contracting with to try to pump that oil. 13 of the 15 members of the UN Security Council opposed the U.S. effort to reimpose the snapback unilateral or multilateral sanctions on Iran, so that's not going to go through, although the U.S. did impose visa restrictions on 14 Iranians. The last thing I had to mention is there were some talks of a potential ceasefire in Libya between the Libyan National Army and the Government of National Accord. The leader of the Libyan National Army, Khalifa Haftar, rejected this, saying that the Government of National Accord was just trying to use it as a ploy to attack the coastal city of Sirte. Egypt has signaled that if the GNA does attack Sirte, that they will come to the defense of Haftar. All right, that's what I have for the show today. Remember, go subscribe to the Conflicts of Interest YouTube channel. My goal is to have 100 subscribers by the time the show launches on Sunday, and we're about a third of the way there. So I know there's enough people that listen to this podcast by Sunday that even if a small fraction of you do it, we'll definitely hit those numbers. And so I really appreciate all the support and all the great things that people have said about the coming show. If you want to check out a preview of it, join the Foreign Policy Focus Facebook group. We're also looking to put together a Patreon page with different tiers. So let us know what we could do for you to give us money. Thanks, everyone.